Imagine standing in the shadows of the Vatican on All Hallows Eve, 1501, watching something no soul should ever witness within those sacred walls. The year is dying, the boundary between heaven and hell growing thin, and in the private chambers of Cesare Borgia, the Pope's own son, 50 women prepare for an evening that will stain the Catholic Church forever. This is not legend, this is not folklore whispered by enemies of Rome. This is documented history, recorded by the Vatican's own master of ceremonies, a man whose job was to bear witness to papal majesty, but who instead became the chronicler of papal sin. Tonight we descend into the darkest hour of the Renaissance papacy, when the throne of St. Peter became a seat of depravity, so complete that even the Romans, who had seen emperors crowned and martyrs burned, could scarcely believe what was unfolding in their holy city. The man who would orchestrate this corruption was born Rodrigo Borgia in Spain, 1431, in a dusty town far from the marble corridors where his destiny awaited. His uncle's elevation to the papacy opened doors that should have remained closed, and at just 25 years old, Rodrigo became a cardinal not through devotion to God, but through the ancient poison of nepotism. He arrived in Rome with hunger burning in his chest, and Rome in the late 15th century was ready to feed that hunger. By day, pilgrims wept before gilded altars. By night, the same streets witnessed transactions that would make merchants of flesh wealthy beyond measure. The papal court had become a marketplace where salvation itself carried a price tag, and Rodrigo Borgia understood this economy better than any man alive. He accumulated wealth like a spider spinning its web, collecting church offices across Europe while maintaining a succession of mistresses who bore him children with the regularity of harvest seasons. The most significant was Vanessa de Catane, a Roman noblewoman who gave him 4 children between 1474 and 1482, each one a chess piece in Rodrigo's game of power. One Cesare, Lucretia, and Joffa. Their lives would be sacrificed on the altar of their father's ambition. Even as a cardinal, Rodrigo's behavior scandalized Rome, and that was no small achievement in a city where scandal flowed as freely as wine. Pope Pius II wrote him a scathing letter condemning conduct that had shocked an entire town, but shame was a luxury Rodrigo could not afford. He had a papacy to win. The conclave of August 1492 unfolded like a carefully choreographed dance of corruption, behind closed doors in the Sistine Chapel, beneath where Michelangelo's masterpiece would one day look down in judgment. 23 cardinals gathered to choose Christ's representative on earth. Gold changed hands with the fluidity of water promises, whispered like prayers, and when the smoke finally cleared on August 11th, Rodrigo Borgia emerged as Pope Alexander VI, a victory achieved through what everyone openly acknowledged as simony, the buying and selling of holy offices. The Romans celebrated with bonfires illuminating the 7 hills, unaware that they had just crowned a man who would transform the Vatican into a theater of the profane. Alexander began his reign with reforms that seemed to promise redemption. He restored order to Rome's blood-soaked streets, where over 200 murders had occurred in just months. He established magistrates, heard grievances every Tuesday, and for a brief moment it seemed divine providence had placed the right man on Peter's throne. But power reveals character rather than creating it, and Alexander's true nature soon emerged like rot beneath fresh paint. His relentless pursuit of advancement for his children, particularly his sons, consumed whatever virtue he might have possessed. Juan became Duke of Gundia, Cesare, an archbishop at 18, positions they treated as stepping stones rather than sacred callings. Before we descend further into this darkness, if you're recaptivated by history's hidden horrors and the true stories that lurk in the shadows of civilization, please consider subscribing. These forgotten tales of power and corruption deserve to be remembered, not to celebrate them but to understand how far humanity can fall when moral boundaries collapse. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we continue exploring the darkest corridors of human history together. The papal apartments during Alexander's reign became a stage where sacred and profane performed an obscene ballet. Dinners stretched into the night with entertainment that pushed boundaries even Renaissance Rome found shocking. Alexander's mistress Julia Farnese, known throughout the city as Julia la Bella for her extraordinary beauty, moved through Vatican corridors as freely as any cardinal, her presence a constant reminder that the Pope's spiritual vows had been trampled by earthly desire. Into this world of contradictions came Johannes Burchard, a meticulous German priest who served as papal master of ceremonies. Beginning in 1483, Burchard maintained a detailed diary that recorded both magnificent ceremonies and scandalous conduct across 5 different papacies. He possessed the soul of an accountant and the eye of a court stenographer, his writings carrying weight precisely because of their dry matter-of-fact tone. He was neither high enough to participate in corruption nor low enough to be excluded from witnessing it. Moving through the Vatican's most private spaces like a shadow, observing everything while appearing to matter very little. By the late 1490s, the Borgia family's behavior had begun attracting negative attention throughout Europe. Then on June 14, 1497, everything changed. Juan's body was discovered floating in the Tiber River, his throat cut, his body bearing 9 wounds. The murder struck Alexander with grief so profound that observers wondered if divine justice had finally visited the Borgia family. For 3 days and nights, the Pope refused food and sleep, weeping like a broken man rather than the mighty pontiff who had intimidated kings. In his anguish he announced church reforms, called for measures to restrain papal luxury, suppress simony and corruption. A commission began drafting ordinances that anticipated reforms still decades in the future. But grief, like everything else in Alexander's character, proved temporary. Within months, the reform proposals were forgotten, filed away like embarrassing letters from youth, and the Pope's attention turned to his surviving son Cesare, whose iron will and ruthless ambition would now drive the family's dark agenda forward into even deeper shadows. Cesare Borgia possessed a magnetism that drew admirers and enemies alike. Tall, handsome, blessed with an intelligence that bordered on genius, he had initially been destined for the church like his father. But Cesare's talents lay in warfare and statecraft rather than theology. In 1498 he resigned his cardinalate, the first cardinal in history to voluntarily abandon sacred office, and set his sights on secular power with the single-minded focus of a predator stalking prey. Through siege, warfare, assassination, and political manipulation, Cesare carved out a domain in central Italy that made him one of the most powerful men in Europe. His methods so effective that Niccolò Machiavelli would later use him as the model for the prince. But such success required resources that even papal coffers could not easily provide, leading Alexander to increasingly creative methods of fundraising that transformed the church into a marketplace where everything, including salvation, carried a price written in gold. The sale of church offices became systematic during Alexander's later years. Wealthy families could purchase ecclesiastical positions for their sons, effectively buying salvation along with social status. The College of Cardinals expanded not through spiritual merit but through financial contribution, each appointment representing thousands of ducats flowing into the papal treasury and ultimately into Caesar's war chest. Rome during this period resembled a city under occupation by its own rulers, the Borgia family treating the papal states as their personal kingdom with Alexander as patriarch and Cesare as crown prince. The Vatican apartments became a stage for increasingly elaborate entertainments that tested the boundaries of acceptable behavior, even by Renaissance standards. Alexander delighted in theatrical performances, musical concerts, and dinner parties that extended deep into the night. Guests including cardinals, ambassadors, wealthy merchants, and an assortment of courtesans whose beauty was matched only by their discretion or lack thereof. These gatherings served purposes beyond mere entertainment. They were demonstrations of papal wealth and power, opportunities for political negotiation, and testing grounds for loyalty among Alexander's supporters. Cardinals who participated in the Pope's entertainments became implicated in his behavior, making them reluctant to criticize or betray him. Those who refused invitations marked themselves as potential enemies, subject to the kind of retribution that had befallen so many of the Borgia's opponents. The autumn of 1501 found the Borgia family at the height of their power and perhaps their corruption. Cesare had successfully completed his conquest of Romagna. Alexander had weathered various political crises, and the Jubilee year of 1500 had brought hundreds of thousands of pilgrims to Rome, filling both the papal treasury and the city's establishments of vice with equal enthusiasm. It was in this atmosphere of triumph and moral decay that Cesare Borgia conceived what would become known as the Banquet of Chestnuts. The exact motivation remains unclear. Was it celebration, political theater, or simply the logical culmination of years of increasingly outrageous behavior? Contemporary sources offer various explanations, but they agree on the essential facts that would shock even seasoned observers of papal vice. October 31, 1501, All Hallows' Eve, when the boundary between sacred and profane was traditionally acknowledged to be at its thinnest. On a night dedicated to remembering the dead, the Borgia family was about to commit acts that would destroy whatever remained of papal dignity. Cesare's apartments in the Vatican had been magnificently decorated by Pinturicchio during the early years of Alexander's reign. Frescoed walls depicted scenes from classical mythology and Christian history, creating an ironic backdrop for events that belonged to neither tradition. The guest list revealed the breadth of corruption the Borgias had achieved. Cardinals who should have been spending the evening in prayer, mixed with Roman nobles whose wealth had purchased their silence about previous papal scandals. Diplomats from various European courts attended, perhaps viewing the evening as an opportunity to gather intelligence, or perhaps simply drawn by curiosity about how far the Borgias would push the boundaries of acceptable behavior. But the true centerpieces of the evening were the 50 courtesans whom Cesare had assembled, sophisticated women who understood the delicate art of providing pleasure while maintaining the discretion that powerful men required. Johannes Bouchard was present that evening in his capacity as master of ceremonies, not as a participant but as an observer, his professional obligations placing him in the perfect position to witness and record events that other observers might have preferred to forget. His account, written in Latin with the clinical detachment of a medical examiner, preserves details that illuminate both the specific events of that evening and the broader moral climate of Alexander's papacy. According to Burchard's meticulous record, the evening began conventionally enough with dinner served in Cesare's private chambers. featuring delicacies appropriate to the season accompanied by wines from the papal cellars. Conversation flowed as smoothly as the wine, touching on politics, military campaigns, and artistic patronage, allowing the assembled company to demonstrate their sophistication. The atmosphere began to change as servants cleared away the dinner plates, and the evening's true entertainment commenced. The 50 courtesans, dressed in silks and velvets carefully selected to display their physical attributes, began to dance for the assembled guests. What followed challenged even the broad definitions of acceptable behavior that had evolved during Alexander's papacy. As Borgia recorded with characteristic precision, the women initially danced clothed, but as the evening progressed and wine continued to flow, garments were gradually discarded until the entertainers performed in states of undress that left nothing to imagination. The centerpiece of the evening involved the chestnuts that gave the banquet its name. Servants removed candelabras from dining tables and placed them on the floor, creating pools of flickering light separated by areas of shadow. Chestnuts were scattered across the floor between these light sources, and the courtesans were instructed to crawl on hands and knees to collect them, their bodies illuminated by candlelight as they moved through the improvised obstacle course, while the most powerful men in Christendom watched from seats of honor. Pope Alexander VI, according to Borgia's account, watched these proceedings accompanied by Caesar and Lucretia. The presence of the Pope's daughter at such an event has puzzled historians for centuries, but all sources agree she was there as the head of the Catholic Church presided over scenes of debauchery that would have made the emperors of ancient Rome pause. Prizes were offered to the men who could perform the most with the courtesans, a competition that Borgia recorded with the same meticulous attention to detail he applied to documenting papal coronations. The master of ceremonies stood in the shadows, his quill scratching against parchment, preserving for posterity what the Borgias perhaps believed would remain forever secret. The banquet of chestnuts was not the end of Alexander VI's papacy, but it represented something profound about what had become of the church under Borgia rule. When Alexander died on August 18, 1503, possibly from malaria or possibly from poison intended for a cardinal whose wealth the Pope coveted, Rome erupted not in mourning but in celebration. His body was left to rot in the summer heat, so swollen and discolored that pallbearers had to force the corpse into its coffin. The people who had once welcomed him with bonfires and triumphal arches now desecrated his memory, a final judgment rendered not by God but by the very citizens he had ruled. The Borgia apartments in the Vatican were sealed after Alexander's death, locked away, like a shameful secret. The frescoes that had witnessed such scenes hidden from view for centuries as if concealing the walls, could somehow erase the sins committed within them. What remains is Borgia's diary, preserved in the Vatican archives like a confession that cannot be destroyed, a testament to how far the church had fallen and how completely the sacred had been consumed by the profane. The banquet of chestnuts stands as a monument to corruption so complete that it transcended mere scandal and became something darker, a moment when the institution meant to represent divine grace on earth instead became a theater for humanity's basest impulses. We remember it not to celebrate the Borgia's excess but to understand that power without moral boundaries creates monsters, and that even the holiest institutions can be corrupted when those who lead them have lost all sense of shame. The chestnuts scattered across that floor in 1501 were more than props in a depraved performance. They were symbols of how something humble and ordinary can be transformed into something obscene when placed in the hands of those who have forgotten what it means to be human. The shadow of that October evening still stretches across centuries, a reminder that the darkness in human nature needs no supernatural explanation, only opportunity and the absence of conscience. What do you think drives human beings to such extremes when given absolute power? Share your thoughts in the comments below, because understanding the past is the only way we can hope to avoid repeating its darkest chapters.